Welcome to Military Analytics. As the Ukraine-Russia war continues to captivate the world's attention, there is news of a new participant joining the conflict. Japan, a country known for maintaining trade relations with Russia and adopting a neutral policy, has made the surprising decision to provide military support to Ukraine. The announcement by Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has raised significant concerns within the Kremlin, as it poses a formidable challenge to Russian occupation forces on Ukrainian soil. This development holds the potential to bring about a substantial shift in the course of the war. The conflict initially began with Russia swiftly invading Ukrainian territory and gaining control over numerous regions. Despite the Ukrainian army's valiant resistance against the Russian forces, they faced difficulties due to the superior arsenal of the Russian military. However, with the timely assistance of the United States and Western nations, the Ukrainian army received advanced technological weapons and equipment, bolstering their capabilities. The most recent addition to their list of supporters is Japan, which has pledged to provide military equipment to Ukraine. This new development further complicates the already strained relations between Russia and Japan, exacerbating the ongoing tensions between the two countries. The repercussions of Japan's support for the Ukrainian army cannot be underestimated, as it has the potential to alter the dynamics of the war and impede the Russian advance. The international community is closely monitoring these battlefield developments, recognizing the increased resilience of Ukraine with the support it has garnered. This assistance marks a significant step towards resolving the conflict. Moreover, the long-standing tensions between Russia and Japan, spanning nearly 77 years, have once again reached an alarming escalation. The root cause of these tensions lies in Russia's invasion of the Kuril Islands, which are rightfully claimed by Japan. Although the islands were recognized as Russian territory after their occupation by the Russian army in 1945, the Japanese government persists in its efforts to regain control. Recent events have further deepened the dispute, such as former Russian leader Dmitry Medvedev's visit to the Kuril Islands. During this visit, Medvedev emphasized Russia's ownership of the islands, even expressing a readiness to engage in conflict if necessary. Subsequently, Russian naval forces dispatched 2 ships near the Kuril Islands. However, upon Putin's orders, these ships bypassed the islands and approached Japan's maritime borders. In response, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida sternly warned the Russian ships to retreat, which they eventually did, anchoring in the Kuril Islands. Nevertheless, this provocative action greatly incensed Prime Minister Kishida, leading to his surprising decision to abandon neutrality and extend support to Ukraine. Prime Minister Kishida's statement underlines the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Putin's potential to violate the borders of other nations. He stresses the necessity for the international community to take action against Putin's aggressive policies and announces Japan's initiation of support for Ukraine. Kishida declares that Japan finds Russia's violation of its maritime borders unacceptable and discloses plans to send a military aid package to Ukraine, comprising tanks, armored vehicles, weapons, and ammunition. The initial stage involves sending 10 tanks, 8 armored vehicles, and a unit of 80 Japanese soldiers to provide training on tanks and weapons to Ukrainian troops. Furthermore, Japan has decided to significantly revise its trade relations with Russia due to the unacceptable behavior displayed by Putin. The delivery of the Japanese military aid package to Ukraine is expected to take approximately 2 to 3 weeks, according to experts' estimates. The global community swiftly picked up on Japan's announcements, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed gratitude, inviting Prime Minister Kishida to visit Ukraine. Experts predict that the arrival of Japanese tanks in Ukraine will significantly enhance the Ukrainian army's capabilities. As of now, there have been no statements from Vladimir Putin regarding Japan's support to Ukraine. However, sources close to the Kremlin report that a meeting has been scheduled in the near future. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has been ongoing for over a year, has now transcended the borders of the two nations. Both sides have actively sought to build alliances on the international stage. Initially feeling isolated, Ukraine has garnered support from the United States and Western countries, enabling access to modern and technologically advanced weaponry. Although Russia's military and economic might outweighs that of Ukraine, the latter has managed to stabilize its position with the aid of its allies. Recognizing the unlikelihood of achieving victory solely with Russian troops, Vladimir Putin resorted to recruiting troops and procuring weapons from allied countries, particularly Iran, Syria, and Belarus. Among these allies, Iran, with its close ties to Russia, has faced scrutiny for allegedly supplying drones and weapons to the Russian army. The Russian army utilized Iranian drones to attack residential areas within Ukrainian territory, committing war crimes against civilian settlements. Ukrainian President Zelensky, outraged by these actions, has sought justice through international courts, filing a lawsuit against Putin with gathered evidence. The United States took the first step against Russia's war crimes by warning Iranian officials of potential prosecution in international criminal courts if they continued selling unmanned fighter jets to Russia. The Iranian government denied selling military equipment after the war began, citing the existence of fighter jets sold to Russia before the conflict's commencement. However, Israeli authorities contradicted Iran's claims, revealing evidence of Russian Defense Ministry cargo planes entering and leaving Iran with unmanned fighter jets and mercenaries on board. This exposed Iran's continued covert support for Russia, also implicating Syria, another Russian ally. Realizing the insufficiency of Russian troops in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin began withdrawing forces from military headquarters in Syria and redirecting them to Ukraine. However, the Russian troops stationed in Syria strongly objected to this decision, as they felt secure in their current position and were aware of the dangers they would face in Ukraine. Nonetheless, they recognized the futility of defying Putin's orders. As a result, 4 Russian headquarters in Syria were closed, and the soldiers were transferred to Ukraine, marking a notable shift in the allocation of resources within the conflict. Ukraine and Russia are trying to establish superiority over each other in the dead end of the Donbass region. Clashes Arena Bakhmut is the scene of the struggle between both sides of the war. In the 41 square kilometer city, the Ukrainian armed forces seem to have established strategic superiority. In recent days, Ukrainian forces have begun to achieve incredible success on the northern and southern flanks of the city. The primary reason the Ukrainians gained dominance in the city was the special forces it housed on the northern flank of Bakhmut, are the Ukrainian 1st Class Detachment, and on the southern line, the soldiers of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, also known as the Azov Regiment, and the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. These special forces of Ukraine have started to squeeze the city from both directions in recent days. This situation has already created great difficulties for the Russian forces, which continue to engage in Bakhmut's central front lines. In addition, with the support of the 1st Burter Detachment from the direction of Kromov, 23 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut, the attack corridor established by the Ukrainians in the north of the city was widened. On the other hand, with the support of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade and Azov Regiment of the Ukrainian attack teams stationed in the wooded areas of Ivanovsky in the southwest of Bakhmut, the southern attack corridor of the Ukrainians was expanded. In other words, the Russian forces were trapped in a ring of fire that narrowed towards the center of Bakhmut. So who was in this ring of fire other than the Russian soldiers? As you know, recently, the commander of the Wagner Group officially announced his withdrawal from Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin announced that he had withdrawn his mercenaries from the southern and northern lines of Bakhmut and carried out a handover with the Russian area in these areas. But with the advance of Ukrainian forces narrowing both the northern and southern lines of Bakhmut, both Russian and Wagner forces are now trapped in Bakhmut's central front line. It was clear long before that this risky strategy carried out by Russia and the Wagner Group would be harmful. And even if it was an obvious fact that the Ukrainians would cram Russian and Wagner forces into Bakhmut and blockade the city from its northern and southern flanks, because the Ukrainian armed forces conducted military operations for weeks in Kromov in the northwest of Bakhmut, Ivanovsky in the southwest, and Chasiv in the west to cut off Bakhmut's main supply lines and keep the Russians away from these access roads. In this way, the Ukrainians laid the groundwork for holding Bakhmut under their grip. So what was the main reason for Russia's current situation in Bakhmut? Now Ukrainian forces can start clashes in the city whenever they want. The only thing Russian and Wagner forces can do now is to take a defensive position in the city and survive the Ukrainian storm surge with minimal casualties. So what is the situation on Ukraine's other front lines after this critical pincer operation in Bakhmut? And in which direction is the war heading? The main efforts of the units of the National Guard of Ukraine, in cooperation with other components of the security and defense sector, were focused on carrying out stabilization actions as well as defense actions in Slobozhenщina, Donetsk, and Tavria. Operational zones Volyn, Polisia, and Siverskaya regions were within the Bessarabia and Pivdenibo operational areas. In addition, it is seen that the Ukrainian National Guard soldiers are mostly focused on maintaining their anti-aircraft defense duties of the dangerous areas along the Black Sea coast in the southern BU operation field and participating in the ground defense in the southwest operation field. Considering all this, during the week, Ukraine's National Guard units suffered heavy casualties from Russian forces in heavy clashes in different sectors of the front, depriving the Russian army of offensive potential in the Zaporizhia and Kherson areas. The Russians, while holding the defense, continued to bombard Ukrainian positions in a chaotic manner using every available weapon, including airplanes. Colonel Nikol Ersigovic, Deputy Director of the Planning Department of the Main Directorate of the National Guard of Ukraine, evaluated these efforts of the Russians. Colonel Nikol Ersigovic assured that despite the strong attacks of the Russian army, the National Guard did not allow them to seize these areas. According to the colonel's statements, the National Guard soldiers continued to perform certain operational and combat tasks as part of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. These convulsive movements of the Russians were actually considered as a retaliation against the situation in the most important clashes arena. So the recent advance of the Ukrainian forces on the Bakhmut front line has left the Russians in a state of panic and do not know what to do. So why did Russia get so attached to Bakhmut and risk losing its advantage in other front lines? The Battle of Bakhmut, which even affected the situation on other front lines, was a battle that was no longer considered possible. The Russian infantry left their trenches and rushed to their deaths in waves of men until the defenders were defeated. In the opinion of many military experts, such battles, sometimes resulting in several hundred casualties a day, were a thing of the past. But they were wrong, even in the 21st century. The violence of war in the city is still as fierce as clashes in ancient times. Russian and Wagner forces suffered heavy losses at Bakhmut. It is claimed that Wagner forces lost about 35,000 mercenaries at Bakhmut. It is thought that the Russian forces lost many more soldiers than this number in the city of Bakhmut alone. In other words, when we look at today, the Russian and Wagner forces wanted to maintain their presence in the city, which they still cannot capture despite all their efforts and record losses. The Ukrainian side undoubtedly suffered heavy losses. According to some military war reports, Ukraine's loss was only slightly less than on the Russian side. But it seems that the losses Ukraine took were worth the sacrifice. Even more important, Russian supporters are defending this situation. Russian journalist Kirill Rogov, considering the latest situation in the war, states that the tough defense in Bakhmut has benefited the whole of Ukraine. Ukraine convinced the West that it needed to supply it with modern air defense systems and, more importantly, modern heavy equipment for ground operations and trained soldiers to use it. And then it waited for deliveries. Could the Ukrainians have achieved all this if there had not been an active clash in those months? Maybe. But stagnation on the front lines would cool the Ukraine issue and give impetus to the ceasefire party in the West in the face of a calming conflict. Procuring heavy weapons might have seemed a far less convincing idea. However, thanks to the unimaginable offensive plans of the Ukrainians, the West did not spare its military support, and the Ukrainian army gave its due. In fact, the Ukrainians repaid the military support of the West, not only in Bakhmut and other eastern fronts, but also in the southern regions. Russian forces have now anxiously begun to increase their defensive fortifications on Ukraine's southern front lines, including in Crimea. One of the main reasons for this situation was, of course, the air attacks on the Crimean Peninsula. Thank you for watching us.